This is a CBSN Pittsburgh special presentation.
Hi, I'm John Delano, Money and Politics Editor, KDKA Television, CBS Pittsburgh. And our very special guest is the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. You know, I'm so tempted to call you Mayor Pete, Mr. Secretary. Do we call
a
you?
lot of folks still do around here, and that's fine by me.
Is that all right? I mean, we could call you Secretary Pete, I suppose. Anybody do that?
I'm hearing a bit of that too, but once you've been a mayor, you're always happy to answer to that title. I think it's still the job that's closest to the ground and so important.
Well, thank you again, Mr. Secretary. I'll call you Mr. Secretary. We appreciate the chance to be with you. So let me ask you right off the bat, the American Rescue Plan that is about to pass the House, the Senate version tomorrow, we believe. Is that beneficial to Pennsylvania and specifically to Western Pennsylvania?
Absolutely. When I think about the families who are going to benefit, the workers who are going to benefit, the communities that are going to benefit, I'm thinking about places like where I come from, and I'm thinking about places like Western PA. Look, this is about getting checks out to families. This is about getting shots into arms. And this is about making sure that America is positioned to pull through this crisis. We've got some really encouraging news in terms of what's going on with the vaccines, signs of energy in the economy, but we are a long way from being out of the woods. And we've got to get the job done. Now, the American people want this. The House and the Senate have passed. Of course, it's back in the House for final approval. I hope it's on the president's desk any day now, because we really shouldn't wait any longer to get this job done.
What does it do for transportation in this region? We've got a lot of issues, and I'm going to break them down in a second. But generally speaking, does this bill provide any help for those engaged in all the varieties of transportation in southwestern Pennsylvania?
Absolutely. Remember, so many of our frontline workers depend on public transit in order to be able to get to their critically important jobs. And there's a lot of residents in Western Pennsylvania and across the country who are going to rely on public transit in order to be able to get their vaccination doses. So this is very much connected to dealing with COVID. Now, the problem is a lot of our transit agencies took a gut punch in terms of the ability to provide service. They've had to look at cutting routes or laying off employees because their revenue collapsed last year. This rescue plan has much needed dollars in order to shore up those transit agencies so that they can deliver and pull through in this period, even while we're thinking about step two, the step I'm very excited for coming after this rescue plan, where we can take up that longer, bigger picture vision to have the best transportation resources for a generation.
I'm going to ask you about infrastructure in a minute, because I know that's what you're focused on, and that's really key. But in terms of the transit agencies, just speaking of them right now, the money is tied to COVID relief. So what does that mean? Cleaner buses, things like that, the T cars that we use, the rail cars we use. Is that what the money's focused on?
Well, yeah, part of this is making sure that transit agencies have the resources to make sure that the use of public transportation is as safe as it can possibly be. Part of it's just helping make up for these shortfalls that the agencies experienced because of that blow to their revenue. And again, all of this, in my view, is hand in glove with fighting COVID, for the simple reason that we can't expect everybody to get vaccinated if you literally can't get to where you need to be.
Is there money in the American Rescue Plan for roads and bridge repair? We have a ton of bridges that need repair, as you probably are discovering in your new position there, as well as roads that need help. Is that going to be really out of infrastructure, or is there something in this particular bill that might help in that score?
So most of that work is part of a future vision. You can think of this as a 1-2 punch. Step one, this rescue plan is getting us through the moment, but we can't wait long for step two, which is the recovery vision. And this is something the president promised as a candidate. He spoke about a big vision for American infrastructure. And I'll tell you, I'm talking to Democratic and Republican members of the House and the Senate, not to mention mayors from both parties and around the country. There was a lot of energy to do this, as you said. And look, this time of year in an area like Pittsburgh, or for that matter, South Bend, Indiana, it's pothole season, right? It's when we think a lot about the condition of our roads after what winter has done to them. We know that roads and bridges in America are in a state of poor repair. We've got to fix it first and deliver a vision for a compelling future. I don't see any reason why a Chinese or a Japanese or British or Italian citizen ought to have access to better transportation than an American citizen. We ought to have the best in the world. And that's the vision that I'm very excited to be talking to America about once we get the job done on this rescue bill.
As you know, or may know, PennDOT, Pennsylvania's Department of Transportation, has talked about putting tolls on our bridges in order to finance the repair of those bridges. And they've actually designated a particular bridge in Pittsburgh and around many others around the state. Nobody likes this idea. It's obviously a way to fund the repair of bridges. How do you feel about tolling bridges in order to repair them?
Well, you can't get something for nothing, but we've got to find a way to fund our road repair and bridge repair that's sustainable over the long term. Now, part of the problem is we've been relying on a federal gas tax that hasn't been adjusted since 1993. And even if we did adjust it, it wouldn't solve the problem that, well, it's not a problem, it's a good thing. We're using less gas, and you're going to see more and more electric vehicles that use no gas at all. So clearly, sooner or later, we've got to change from the old way of funding our roads and bridges to something different, something new. And that's part of what I'm looking forward to discussing with partners on both sides of the aisle who have a lot of interesting ideas in the months ahead. There are places where tolling can be appropriate. I'm certainly used to it where I come from, but we can't slap a toll on every mile of road or every bridge and expect that to work. So we've got to have some big picture solutions too.
Are you open to the mileage tax, which essentially would tax people for the number of miles they drive on a road, as opposed to the fuel and the kind of vehicles they have?
I think we do need to look at that. Look, again, this is the idea of the gas tax. You know, the more you drive, the more you're using the road, and the more you pay. It seems fair. And so there have been ideas for what you might call a usage or mileage fee. It could go off your odometer, for example. Same idea, it's just not based on gasoline. Now, there are some issues with how you get that data, and can you do it in a way that's respectful of privacy? I don't think we've solved all of those puzzles, but we need to be taking a serious look at it in order to sustainably fund our roads for the future.
Let me return to public transit, which of course is a very big issue here in Allegheny County and frankly in the surrounding counties as well. Uh, you know, I know that when I talk to officials at those agencies, they really are talking in terms of hundreds of millions of dollars in order to do some of the things like new rail cars for the T here in Pittsburgh, or perhaps fuel efficient, non-gasoline driven buses in this region. And there's just no way that the state or the tax base can support that. Is that part of what you envision for an infrastructure bill?
That's right. Look, it's part of what we're doing now. In fact, I recently signed off on a grant announcement for low and no emission buses for electric vehicles that transit agencies can use. But there's so much more that we could be doing. And we shouldn't ask local taxpayers and communities to foot the entire bill for what really is a national project of moving our infrastructure into a new era. That's why I think we have a once in a lifetime opportunity to deliver resources at a level truly needed to beat our competitors on the world stage and to have an expectation of first-rate transportation for any American, no matter what kind of community you live in.
Are you prepared to provide funding then for new rail cars here in Pittsburgh?
I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and we'll look at exactly what combination of grant funding and mandatory funding might be available. But bottom line, I want to make sure this department is a partner to local communities and local transit agencies as they work to upgrade their resources to better serve citizens.
Are you at all familiar with the issue of tolling Interstate 80 through the state of Pennsylvania? That was an issue at one time. It was recommended to DOT. I think it was shot down, but there are those who believe it should be tolled. Do you have any thoughts or views on that one?
So this is something I'm pretty used to because the stretch of I-80 that goes west of Pennsylvania will eventually bring you about 1.5 miles from my house in South Bend. And in our part of Indiana, it is tolled. I'm not saying that that's a right or wrong answer for Pennsylvania. We want these decisions as much as possible to be driven from the ground up rather than coming from Washington. But what we want to make sure is that the right level of support and resources is coming from Washington. We're not going to provide all the answers, but we want to provide a lot more of the help.
So you're not ruling it out?
I think that we should always be looking at creative ways to make sure that that there are resources going to what's needed. I don't know all of the details of how that debate has been playing out in Pennsylvania, but again, we want to make sure that when a community or a state makes a decision, that we're there to make sure that it goes well.
Finally, Mr. Secretary, sorry about that. Let me ask you about about airlines and airports, because that's another form of transportation we haven't quite discussed yet. As you may or may not know, Pittsburgh is building a new terminal, and it's going to take 3 years to build, and they're trying to use all the modern technologies, including considering really what they're calling the post-pandemic technologies. How important do you view airports in the scheme of things? Some people say, well, most Americans don't fly, and yet those who do fly will say our airports are a disgrace, particularly if you've seen others overseas. What's your view of the importance of airports as part of an infrastructure plan?
Yeah, this is another example of how when I travel around the world, or when I used to pre-pandemic, I would marvel at what many countries have done for their airports, and be a little frustrated that Americans can't expect to have the best anymore. I think we should. And this is another area where we've got to make sure that there's sustainable funding. Look, you don't have to use an airport to benefit from it. They are economic engines. And this is part of infrastructure too. You can't reach out and grab the national airspace the way you can physically touch a bridge or a road, but our airspace is critical infrastructure. And airports are, of course, the gateway to the American national airspace.
Last question. We want you to come to Pittsburgh. You going to be here sometime soon?
I sure hope so. I was there not long ago during the campaign, had a wonderful visit with Mayor Peduto, and saw some of the great things going on in the area, and would love to have a chance to visit in a new capacity as soon as it's safe.
Well, Secretary Pete Buttigieg from the U.S. Department of Transportation, thank you, sir, very much. It's good to be with you, and I appreciate you talking to us today.
Same here. It's a pleasure.
This has been a CBSN Pittsburgh special presentation. We now return to our scheduled programming in progress.
You get 35 for overnight lows in Katanning in Indiana, 35 Butler, Pittsburgh 39.